Or Sabah al-Khair, everyone. Hasab, where are you living? Good evening, everyone, or good morning, everyone. This is Ziad Abbas. I'm working with Mecca, Middle East Children's Alliance, based in Berkeley. I would like to welcome everyone to join us for this event, where all of us together will learn about what's going on in Lebanon. We are fortunate to have amazing two speakers. They are activists, they are people living in the ground, and they will help us to understand what's going on in Lebanon, now, in the past, in the future, etc. Before I start that, I would like to just say something about Mecca for the people they don't know about Mecca. Mecca, actually an organization started almost 32 years ago. We are working in the Middle East in different parts. In the Middle East, we are working in Palestine, especially in Gaza Strip, West Bank, East Jerusalem, 1948. And we are working in Lebanon, where we work with Palestinian refugees, Syrian refugees, and any other refugees living in the refugee camps in Lebanon. Our focus is to stand in solidarity with people that are facing different kind of oppression, and especially support the people initiatives in the ground and to be with them. Right now, before we go to Lebanon, actually, we have few updates about what's going on in Palestine. The tension is really, really very high on the borders of Gaza. Gaza, for almost like, right now we are coming 14 years under siege, and last night they were bombing, and still the tension is growing up, and it's a scary situation in Gaza. West Bank, the same. There are a lot of actions against the Israeli occupation, and these days actually they are targeting many Palestinian communities, the settlers, especially in Silwan, in Jerusalem neighborhoods, and many areas around Hebron. In addition to that, the people in the whole Middle East, in Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan, and many other countries, they are facing the pandemic, and this is extra on their shoulders, and this is a huge. But in the case of Palestine, the pandemic actually it's used by the Israeli occupation to target the Palestinian more and more in the ground. We are fortunate, we organized this event actually to help ourselves and to help other people. We received many calls from people asking what's going on in Lebanon, and the best way is to bring people and voices from the people living inside Lebanon. This event, as you see, it's a technical Zoom. It's a new reality we need to deal with. And sometimes it's like a punishment, because we used to have the event to see each other and to be in that room, but now it's not possible. So, and in the past, people used to raise their hands to ask a question. So if you have any question, please keep it until the end of the, write it in the chat room, actually, and I will look at it. And if you are in the Facebook, please, write your question there. My colleagues will transfer the question to us. Our program tonight actually will be, each speaker will speak for 15 minutes, and after that will be Q&A. So feel free to prepare your question, and this is an opportunity for all of us to learn about that. The other issue is that I would like to thank everyone who helped us to do this event. We have our all staff members working in Gaza and West Bank, and here based in Berkeley, and we have here actually our two colleagues working with us right now, Josie from Bethlehem in Palestine, and we have Dean, he's based in Sacramento here in California. Thank you both to be with us. We are definitely living strange and unsettling times. It's really very hard. And for the whole situation in the Middle East, all the time it's unsettling. No country is settled. For us, as I'm a Palestinian, I grew up in a refugee camp. I grew up and learning that this situation, especially for the other Arab countries around Palestine, will never be settled. And this is the fact we need to be aware of it. Whatever will happen in the Middle East, and especially for these countries surrounding Palestine, the Israeli colonial system is not leaving them alone, even if they try to take care of their own issues. And here it's a key issue for us. Lebanon is facing different kind of a crisis, financial crisis, economic crisis, of course, and social crisis, political crisis. And in addition to that, the pandemic. And in April 4th, we had this tragic incident, the explosion, which left over 200 people died and over 6,000 people injured. It's the investigation is still going on. We cannot say it's accident or someone meant to do that. I will leave it for our speakers. But before we start, I would like to introduce the first speaker with us, Dr. OLFAT Mahmoud. Dr. OLFAT, actually, I need to shift a little bit. Sorry. Dr. OLFAT is a Palestinian refugee from Tarshiha. And a Palestinian refugee born in Lebanon. And originally she's from Tarshiha village. And Tarshiha actually very known in Palestine. It's in the borders. OLFAT actually focused on her issue connected to her parents and her grandparents on the issue of right to return. And this is actually, I call it it's because me, myself as a refugee, and I know all my relatives and other friends, the issue of right to return, it's like the air, we breathe it every day. It never leaves us. And this is the desire inside us. It's the hope, it's the dream. And for us, it's not something just we look at it far. It's for us, inside us, it's achievable. It's living in us. And this is why it's part who we are. OLFAT actually is a very active Palestinian woman. She's working in Women Humanitarian Organization, Palestinian Women Humanitarian Organization, where we partner with her all the time. I spoke with OLFAT all the time, and recently after the explosion, actually, almost every day, because the women organization is our partner and they are doing amazing work in the ground. And we are so lucky to have a leadership of women working in this organization where help us as Mecca and inspire us and influence us to continue do the work we are doing to be in solidarity with all these groups in Lebanon or in Palestine. OLFAT at the same time, she's teaching actually in Lebanese, no, sorry, I'm wrong. In the Beirut Arab University, she's teaching there. She's a professor. And OLFAT, she was actually among the group that was selected to represent the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon in 2015. She traveled with this group to United Nations to raise the issue of the Palestinian refugees living in the diaspora. And since, actually I can say we are working with OLFAT, the issue of right of return and the issue of the refugees, it's part who keep us working and influence us. And one thing I want to say, sometimes it's people living in very bad conditions, refugee camps, but you have amazing people where they take their own initiatives and their very creative initiatives influence others. I will leave the mic with the first speaker, OLFAT Mahmoud. OLFAT?
Yes. Sorry,
OLFAT,
the microphone,
can you hear us?
microphone was not working. Okay. Thank you, Ziad, very much for this beautiful introduction. I would like to thank you all for joining this webinar. I would like to thank Mecca for giving me the chance to speak about the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, about the situation of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. Actually, you know, we have been refugees for 72 years. So to speak 15 minutes about the situation is a bit tricky. Anyway, I will try to summarize as much as I can. I'm not going to go to the past because you know the past. It's Palestinians became refugees after 1948 war when they were kicked out of their country and they went to neighborhood countries. My grandparents came to Lebanon. So as many as others also, they came to Lebanon and They thought they are going to Lebanon only for 15 days until war is settled. They ended up refugees for 72 years. It's a very painful experience, actually, to be a refugee. They look at you as stateless. And also people living in refugee camps or as refugees in Lebanon, they don't have structure. Like, you know, stateless, they don't have structure. They don't have ministries to look after them. They don't, sometimes it's a blessing, but not all the time. So Palestinians suffer, and in every minute in their lives. So, for example, people are kept in refugee camps, very small. We as refugees, we are not allowed to expand. The only way to expand is to go up. So the land was rented from the Lebanese government by the United Nations, and they formed camps. So the infrastructure of the camp is very, very poor. People live in sort of housing, very small. I'll give you an example. The camp I come from, it's Burj al-Barajni camp. It's in Beirut, in the capital. It's less than a square kilometer, and 45,000 people live in this camp. The agreement between the UN and the Lebanese government, it's temporary place for Palestinians, which means no signs of settlement. What does that mean? No water, no electricity, no phone lines, or any other facilities. So until now, people in the camp, they buy the city water to be able to drink and to cook and to do things like that. The houses were built not permanently. People thought it's for a short period of time. So we don't have really strong foundation. And the houses, like in Burj al-Barajni, 800 houses are at risk to fall down at any minute. The sewage system is very poor, and it floods in winter, preventing children from going to school. Again, because we are stateless, we have no access to any public services in Lebanon. So Palestinians can't get any public services in Lebanon. And because they live in Lebanon, they can't get access to the Palestinian Authority services as well. So this left us with very little opportunities. We have the United Nations agency, UNRWA, but it's mainly service provision, no right to protection to refugees or any in its mandate. And we have PRCS, Palestinian Red Crescent Society. Both, they provide services, but very limited, and it's not enough. We have the Ngo sectors, and the Ngo sectors became very active after 1982. After BLO left Lebanon, evacuated from Lebanon, Ngo sectors became really very strong, but high expectation from people from the NGO sector. We try our best. Also, you know, we are not fashion nowadays. We don't have war. So unfortunately, always media and aid programs always attracted by, you know, by war, by conflict. So refugees, for this reason, they don't get much attention, especially after the Oslo Accords. Sometimes people think we have been refugees for so long, so they get bored from our issue. But I would tell the international community, if you get bored from just listening to the Palestinians suffering, what Palestinians should say? Those who suffer every minute in their lives. And the international community should be ashamed, actually, because they haven't solved our problem. And we believe our problem, it's a human kind problem. It's a human being kind problem. It's created by a human being when they decided to divide Palestine into 2 states and following war. So the international community is responsible for our problem, and they should keep supporting us until we get a fair solution. Education for Palestinians is very poor. Like, for example, you know, United Nations agency, they provide the elementary schools, but high schools, no. Because it's not UNRWA mandate, only talk about elementary schools. What happened recently, around 10 years ago, what they did, they started to provide high school education, but only for all Beirut camps, only one school, which can't accommodate all students. So they take students only with very good marks. But that doesn't mean students with good or fair marks not to get the chance to continue their education. Some of them, they get fair marks because they work and study at the same time, or because they don't have the right atmosphere to study. So they are deprived from continuing their education. University education, it's private. So we should pay for our education. And this is very difficult, especially nowadays. We have health. Oh my God, health is another big problem for refugees. The United Nations mandate as well is to provide basic health care. So people with chronic illnesses, or it's not really in their mandate. And one clinic in each camp, you know, like the doctor will see 100 patients a day, and a day doesn't mean long day. It's a short day from 8 till 2 o'clock, including coffee break and writing reports. Like, the situation is very miserable. Just imagine you have no access to any public services. So everything private is okay, available, but people can't afford it. This is the problem. Being stateless means as well, you are not recognized. And this affects us a lot. Like we are not recognized as a human being even. Now, the whole world nowadays is so obsessed about the human rights. When it comes to the Palestinians, people forget about the human rights, unfortunately. So we are in desperate need to everything. We face, as refugees in the camps, we face many crises. The main crisis is being refugee. But also, because we live in Lebanon, we have to face the Lebanese crisis as well. So we are affected now by the 17th of October revolution. We are affected by COVID-19 virus. We are affected by the drop of the Lebanese lira value. We are affected by the harsh economic situation. Palestinians, because they are refugees, they have no right to work in Lebanon in 72 jobs. Few years, the government decided to change a bit, and they allowed us to do some work, but the syndicates and unions refused. So that means we went back to, we are not allowed to do 72 jobs. If you are not allowed to work, how you can survive? Most people actually, they work in daily payment work. Yani in construction, maybe taxi driver, even it's not legal, but still people do it. Selling vegetables, and all of this type of work mostly have stopped. Why? Because of the economic situation, because of COVID-19, because of the revolution. So most people lost their jobs. If you don't work, no one, like, you don't get any support. So what is life for you? And people started really to lose the hope. And I believe, as Palestinian myself, 1948, it's a conflict, it's a crisis, but the catastrophe if we lose the hope. So we should help people to keep the hope, actually. We need to help people to survive. And this is why aid programs are actually crucial element to the Palestinians surviving. Like people won't survive without aid programs. Because of this, we always calling on international NGOs like Mecca. We always get support and help. And, you know, people are actually traumatized. But believe me, people feel less traumatized when they get supported. And this is why, for example, on the feast day, we distributed meat to the people because it's very expensive and no one can buy it. People were so happy. Some of them told us, like, for 9 months, we haven't eaten meat. Some for 6 months. This is minimum 6 months. Actually, a piece of meat brought joy to the family. So imagine how much the aid program can help people to survive and to feel a little bit the joy and to enjoy life a little bit. We are here all together in this ground to enjoy life. We are here as visitors. We will die one day. So this is why we should enjoy life. But how you can enjoy life if you put in the corner and ask you to suffer because you are stateless or you are a refugee? Sorry, I'm giving you this picture, but this is a reality. This is the reality. Life is very miserable for the refugees. And on the top of that, in Lebanon, it's not only we are considered refugees, there are lots of discriminations in law and the way they treat refugees. So this is why we are very dependent on you. We are very dependent on international NGOs to get some help to survive, to be able to continue our education, to be able to live in decent life. Always as Palestinians, we consider education is very important because it gives you another identity, being well educated. Unfortunately, nowadays, people can't afford sending their kids to private school when there is no vacation for them, no space for them in UN schools. So we need lots of support, actually. We need lots of help. We are not begging. And this is very important for people to know. We are not begging because we were forced to leave our homes. We were forced to leave our countries. So, and the international community actually is responsible as well because they facilitate for that. So this is why now when we teach kids about taking decision or making decision, we teach them like, yes, you have the right to make decision, but you have to take responsibility of this decision you have made. So how come the international community made the decision, deprived us from our rights, kicked us out of our homeland, and then they won't take the responsibility? I believe the international community should support us because it's our right. We are not begging. It's very well-known fact. Palestinians, when they were in Palestine, they were well off. And I hope one day to return back to our homeland and to be able to help others because we suffered from being refugees and we don't want anyone to suffer like us. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. As I told you, in 15 minutes, I can't talk about 72 years, but you can ask me any question and I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, OLFAT, so much for this, for these details about life of refugees in Lebanon. Right now, we are going to, of course, OLFAT will get back to us after RANIA. We will have time for Q&A. So feel free to write your, to send us your question. And before actually I move to the second speaker, RANIA MASRI, I would like to remind the people, we have other events coming, not in a coalition, World Without Walls. It will be organized, this event will be in August 28th. It will be present Angela Davis, Jamal Jum'a, and Kristen Bailey. This is an amazing event. I recommend everyone to join this event. And if you want to learn more about our event, you can go to our Mecca website and learn, and I hope you can join. Right now, I want to switch to the other speaker. She's a friend of Mecca too, and she's living in Lebanon right now. Dr. RANIA MASRI is a long-time political activist committed to issues of justice in the Arab world, actually. And she is joined the Citizen in the State, a political party. بالعربي, it's مواطنون ومواطنات في دولة. Citizen in a State. It's a political party actually started RANIA started in 2016 and works to change the status quo in Lebanon through direct political action and to build direct relations between the state and its citizens, governed by rights and responsibilities, rather than by a relationship of silence via segregation affiliations. In 2017, actually, RANIA was elected president of the party delegates council. Currently, Dr. RANIA MASRI is teaching in Lebanese American University, LAU. Her academic publication focus on environmental sustainability and social movement, as well as boycott, campaign, and liberation for Palestine. She can be reached directly at RANIA MASRI and at facebook.com RANIA MASRI. Anyway, you can go to our website and you can get the right information, because my accent, I know I have an accent and I love it actually. Right now we'll go with RANIA and we'll get back after that for a Q&A. Thank you. RANIA, wait, we cannot hear you.
Perfect. تحية للجميع. Thank you to the Middle East Children's Alliance for this invitation. And it's good to see some of my old friends are among the attendees here. You know, the morning of the explosion, the morning of August 4th, I was talking to a colleague of mine at the university, and he said, it can't get any worse. We had already gone into bankruptcy in 2019. The country fell officially into bankruptcy. Bankruptcy means that unemployment now is at 50%. Our currency has lost 70 to 80% of its value. Our poverty rate in the country right now is exceeding 50%. And since we are a country that imports 86% of our needs, being bankrupt means that we no longer have the ability to import our basic necessities. So on top of the bankruptcy, then we got COVID-19. So he was telling me, you know, how much worse could it get? And I said, never say it can't get worse. And 4 hours later, we had the port explosion. This is one of the largest explosions in world history, arguably one of the largest non-nuclear explosions at all. And in Lebanon, it is most definitely one of our largest explosions. We're talking about 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate that were improperly stored at the port. We've recently learned that not all of the 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate actually exploded. It was closer to 600 tons. We don't know where the remaining ammonium nitrate went. We do know that more than 200 people have been killed. More than 50 people remain missing. More than 6,000 people were injured. And more than 300,000 people became homeless instantaneously. In addition to all that, we lost 4 hospitals. We lost the equivalent of $16 billion in infrastructural loss. And as a consequence of all of this, we also now have an increased surge of COVID-19 pandemics. Some people have been saying that this has been an accident. Ziad alluded to that in the beginning. Can we say it was an accident, or was it caused by an Israeli attack? Was it caused by the CIA? Was it caused by a deliberate explosion? Nobody knows, or somebody knows, but we don't know. What we do know, though, is that it is local responsibility that left 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate to be improperly stored on our ports for more than 6.5 years. That is local responsibility. The Economist recently wrote, and I quote, "What kind of government leaves a mountain of explosive chemicals lying around unsafely for the better part of a decade?" And the Economist goes on to describe this kind of government. But the issue isn't what kind of a government does this. The issue is what kind of a political system allows for 3 successive governments to leave a mountain of explosive chemicals lying around unsafely for the better part of a decade. What kind of a political system encourages this level of incompetence and political indifference and political lack of responsibility? Hassan Diab, our latest prime minister to offer his resignation, when he was resigning, he said, and I quote, he's denouncing a system of corruption. And I'm sure you've been hearing this a lot. It's been in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and other US papers, talking about the corruption in Lebanese governments. And I find it to be quite absurd, actually, for US papers to talk about corruption as if the corruption in Lebanon is not a natural consequence of the political system itself. This political system, by the way, that the US government is trying to emulate in Iraq, in Syria, and in Libya. This very political system that by design is corrupt. And I say this because corruption, and we know we have some wonderful philosophers that are in attendance here, and I'm sure they can add to this, corruption is by definition a form of dishonesty by a person or an organization entrusted with a position of authority in order to get benefit or abuse of power for one's private gain. When you have a sectarian political system, as we have in Lebanon, thanks to the French former colonial masters, thanks to the Americans and the British governments that have maintained it, when you have a sectarian system, that means the heads of these sectarian, so to speak, communities must, by definition, build a relationship of services and clientelism between themselves and the citizenry. They must, by definition, not support universal health care, must stand in opposition to public education, must stand in opposition to fair housing. So when you have a system of services that breeds clientelism, it becomes only natural for that very system to then encourage incompetence, which is what we have when we have individuals assigned to positions, not out of merit, but simply out of services and favors. So for example, one of the heads of the Port Authority after the explosion, he actually said, and I'm quoting, "We knew ammonium nitrate was dangerous, but we didn't know it was this dangerous." So again, he's acknowledging his incompetence and ignorance. The very sectarian system also, by design, encourages a lack of decision-making because we do not have institutions that are built in the country. Dr. OLFAT spoke about the lack of public services, or specifically the denial of public services to Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. We also have, by design, a disintegration of public services for all the citizenry in Lebanon. And again, that is by design, because this sectarian political system does not build institutions, rather it builds communities, it's separate kind of statelets, each communicating with one particular sectarian leader and each maneuvering on their own. So thereby we've had, as been revealed over the past 6.5 years, we've had letters that were sent from the military to the Port Authority, to the courts, to the ministries, to the president, et cetera, each of these letters saying, we have a problem on the ports, you deal with it. So throwing the responsibility on someone else's shoulders and avoiding decision-making. And again, that is part and parcel of the very design of a sectarian political system. So what we say in Lebanon is that the explosion of August 4th did not take 6.5 years in the making. The explosion of August 4th actually took 30 years in the making, because this very political system has become so enshrined specifically over the past 30 years in Lebanon. It's much older than that, but it really got its teeth out in the past 30 years. what has been the response of the foreign community or the so-called international community? And of course, when we speak about international community, we're specifically here, talking about the United States and England and Germany and France, because there seems to be, if you're not white, you're not part of the international community. But anyway, when we look at the response of the so-called international community, there's been a lot of talk about the aid that is coming into Lebanon, hundreds of millions of dollars of aid. Well, again, we are a bankrupt country. We just lost $16 billion in our infrastructure. We lost a quarter of our capital city. We lost 4 hospitals. And the international community, quote unquote, pledges $300 million in foreign aid. They pledged $1 billion in aid, by the way, after Notre Dame was burned in Paris, just as a comparison. The United States, let's bring it home. The United States has pledged a total of $17 million in disaster aid for Lebanon. $17 million. Okay, so what does that number mean, $17 million? Should we be grateful for the United States for this support? The United States had previously, from 2006 until 2012 in Lebanon, spent $1 billion. The US government spent $1 billion in Lebanon between 2006 and 2012, more than $600 million of which were spent specifically to influence parliamentary elections in Lebanon as an attempt by the United States to weaken Hezbollah. So while folks in the US are up in arms over the alleged involvement of the Russian government in US elections to prop up Trump, we know for a fact the involvement of the US government and hundreds of millions of dollars thrown into Lebanese elections. So again, $17 million now being spent. Previously, they spent $1 billion. And of course, if we want to compare it even further, just last year, the US provided the Zionist entity of Israel $3.8 billion in direct foreign military aid. So let's put these numbers into context when they speak about financial support. More detrimental than the peanuts that they are giving us in Lebanon, more detrimental than this, is how the United States and the European Union and their client regimes in the Arab Gulf have responded to this atrocity, to this act of criminal negligence in Lebanon by actually seeking to influence Lebanese affairs through both a carrot and a stick. Specifically, the Trump administration has responded to it very openly, and I appreciate the honesty of the Trump administration, by the way. The Wall Street Journal reported on August 12th that the US government is preparing to impose new sanctions against Lebanese politicians and Lebanese businessmen in an attempt to weaken Hezbollah's influence. So not only do we get a bankruptcy caused by Lebanese politicians first and foremost, not only on top of that do we get the COVID-19 pandemic in addition to everybody else in the world also suffering from, not only do we get one of the world's largest explosions in history, destroying a vast portion of our capital. On top of all that, the Trump administration sees this as a fantastic opportunity to weaken Hezbollah. They specifically said this is an opportunity to drive a wedge between Hezbollah and Iran. Okay, so the top US officials want to, quote, turn the screws. And of course, the reason that they are opposed to this, that they're opposed to Hezbollah, is not because Hezbollah is a sectarian party. The US government loves sectarian parties all around the world. We know that very clearly. We can just look at their support of Saudi Arabia, okay? It's not because Hezbollah is a corrupt political party. Not at all. The US government couldn't care less about corruption anywhere in the world. It's not because the US government wants to impose some kind of a democratic regime in Lebanon. It is simply because Hezbollah has been able to defeat Israel in a military war back in 2006. That's it. Okay, Hezbollah is partly responsible for the port explosion. Let me make that very clear, because Hezbollah is one of those sectarian parties in Lebanon that is part of a system that can only bring us bankruptcy and explosions and racism against Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. But again, that is not the reasons that the US government is pushing for increased sanctions that would be detrimental to everybody in Lebanon. France, on the other hand, within 48 hours following the devastating explosion, French President Macron evaded the Gilets jaunes in Paris, evaded the yellow vest, anti-austerity and anti-Macron protest in Paris, and came to Lebanon to confer with the sectarian ruling class and told them, and I quote, pull your act together. So here we have our former colonialist coming to Lebanon to brandish their colonialism even further. And what he did is now they are pushing the French for what we call a national unity government. In other words, let us hold on to a sectarian regime in Lebanon. Let us hold on to these sectarian political parties. But what the French are also very much trying to do is to weaken Hezbollah, perhaps not as much as the United States, but they're also seeking to weaken Hezbollah and to have political conditions for any aid that is given. So what we have in Lebanon right now is, in addition to all of these atrocities and all of these tragedies just over the past year, all of which are an accumulation of a 30-year policy, okay? In addition to all that, we have foreign countries openly, without any sense of shame, speaking about interfering in domestic policies. None of their interferences will actually be for the benefit of the country itself. All of these interferences will be for their own political objectives. And all of these interferences will be detrimental to the economic welfare of Lebanon, as well as to the political welfare of Lebanon. So where can we go from here? What are the scenarios we see in front of us? We have increased economic hardships on top of the bankruptcy and the pandemic and the destruction, all while maintaining a destructive sectarian system. We have another scenario in which these sectarian leaders in Lebanon could be divided amongst themselves, leading to increased tension and possibly civil violence erupting in the country. All the while, we have a state of emergency that has been imposed on Beirut and extended. A state of emergency means that we have increased military rule right now in Beirut. The army can ban gatherings deemed threats to national security. They can shut down assembly points. They can expand the jurisdiction of military courts over civilians. With all of these scenarios, one thing we are also guaranteed is that immigration would increase out of Lebanon. Already we have lost 50% of 2 generations. So from 1992 to 2019, 50% of those between the ages of 20 and 50 in Lebanon have emigrated. This is a greater loss to our country than the economic bankruptcy and then the further privatization of our public resources in Lebanon. This immigration is bound to increase. Poverty is bound to increase. And of course, this poverty that will increase will affect those who are already on the margins in Lebanon, including most prominently Palestinian refugees and the more than 1.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Yes, it can get worse. I tell my colleague it can still get worse. But the issue is, and I say this as a political activist, the issue is this is not fated. It's not as if we have no choice and we're watching as spectators, to a football match. There is a viable political alternative that many of us in Lebanon are working on, most prominently the political party that I am a member of. What we want is a transformation of the political system in Lebanon from a political sectarian system to one that is egalitarian and civil, in which we would be represented according to our citizenship and not according to this hogwash called sectarian identity. Because the mere concept of the West continuing to look at this region as we are religious communities coexisting is a concept that deprives us of our citizenship, deprives us of our nationality, deprives us of our political viewpoints, deprives us of our individuality, and by design creates division. So what we want is a more honest portrayal of our society, which means a civil state. And we are working towards that, and I can speak at length in the Q&A if you want as to the specific political program that my political party has proposed since November of last year. Very key, since Palestine remains the heart of this region, what would a civil state mean to our relationship with Palestine and our relationship with the Zionist state? You might have heard a few days ago that President Michel Aoun, the president of Lebanon, said in one of his interviews that we are open, he is open to a conversation about peace with Israel once a few things are solved. Be that the continuing occupation of the Shafaa farms in Lebanon or so on and so forth. For us, for our view as a political party, and we are not alone in this viewpoint, we consider Israel to be an enemy not because it occupies Lebanese lands. We consider Israel to be an enemy not because it has committed massacres against Lebanese since 1948, since the massacre of Hola in 1948 and onwards. We consider Israel to be an enemy not because it is continuing to occupy the Golan Heights of Syria. Israel is an enemy to Lebanon because it is a Zionist apartheid settler state colony, period. Irrespective of any occupation of Lebanese lands, irrespective of any violations of Lebanese airspace, sea space, and land space, irrespective of all of these things, so long as Israel continues to exist as a Zionist state, building its identity on apartheid, it will remain an enemy to all those in the region that believe in citizenship and equality and justice. And we, those in the region that do not believe in a sectarian representation of our identity, will remain an enemy to Israel. This is what it means to be enemies. So this is what my party believes in. This is what many other parties in this region believe in. Consequently, when we look at Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, one of the main reasons, if not the fundamental reason, that Palestinians in Lebanon have been so discriminated against, particularly, by the way, in response to Rafiq al-Hariri, the prime minister who was killed in 2005 and who was brought to power in Lebanon in 1992, okay, particularly because of his actions. But one of the reasons that there is such discrimination against Palestinians in Lebanon is because we have a so-called sectarian identity. So there is a demographic threat because of, Palestinians may skew the demographics of our sects and all of this other pure hogwash nonsense, because it is a false identity. Of course, Palestinian refugees and Syrian refugees in Lebanon, with no exception, deserve even if we're only going to be speaking at it as Lebanese, deserve to have full educational rights, full political rights, full economic rights, and full universal healthcare in Lebanon. No exception. These are rights that must be given to all citizenry and to all residents, and particularly to Palestinian refugees and Syrian refugees. This is also part of our vision. While we work to change this political system in Lebanon, I also hope that we would recognize the fake borders that the French and the English gave us. After the explosion, one of the most poignant statements I got was from a dear friend of mine in 1948, which is how we refer to Palestinians in 1948 Palestine. And we also have to remember our language, that it is all Palestine. Min al-Nahr, all of Palestine. So my friend in 1948 Palestine wrote to me afterwards and saying that he wanted to support us, but he cannot. He wants to be beside us, but he cannot. He feels our pain, but cannot support us in Lebanon in any way because he is in 1948 Israel, 1948 Palestine. But he ended his statement by saying, ستتحرر هذه الأجزاء يوماً حتى لو بضوء انفجاراتكم. These parts, these entities that have been divided by the French and the English from the Sykes-Picot Agreement will one day be liberated and united, even if it will be by the light of their bombs. This is what we believe in. We are working for the transformation of our political system in Lebanon. We are working for a more honest recognition of who we are as children of the land and not as these divisive sectarian communities. And we stand with you right now, an appeal from Lebanon to you all in the United States to work valiantly to oppose all forms of US sanctions, be they against Syria, be they against Lebanon, because these sanctions can only bring destruction and division. Thank you. Ziad, we can't hear you, my friend.
Now you can hear me. Sorry. Thank you, Rania, so much. It was amazing. Thank you so much for you and for OLFAT. This is amazing, like where we understand what's going on in Lebanon, and especially about all these kind of corruption history connections, etc. At the same time, the updates what's going on in refugee camps, and especially from OLFAT. I want to give a few minutes for Rania to breathe. So I will have the first question to OLFAT actually. But before we start the Q&A, just want to remind the people, if you are not part of our mailing list in Mecca, please go subscribe and you will receive some emails about like these events and other updates about the situation in Lebanon. And if you don't like our emails, remember, you have delete button. You can delete it if you don't like it after you read it. The other thing is for us, and please, if you want to support, there are many amazing initiatives and still many campaigns online to support people in Lebanon. Please, you can go to our website to support. And if you want to organize anything, take an initiative, please do that. Contact us. Go to meccaforpeace.org and we will be in touch with you shortly. OLFAT, are you with us? OLFAT, can you hear me? I have the first question actually for OLFAT about the situation in the refugee camps. I know Rania gave us very deep analysis about what's going on in Lebanon, especially before and during the explosion and all these kind of political, I call it attacks actually, on the stability of the Arab countries in general, and especially in this period in Lebanon. Right now, just we need to have more updates, if it's possible, about COVID-19. I know both of you spoke about this, but can we have very clear picture about the COVID, especially both of you right now in the houses locked down, right?
Yes.
You don't go out anywhere, etc. And what's going on? I know the country, Lebanon announced, I think 2 weeks, I don't know. Can you update us about this?
Actually, it started today, lockdown for 2 weeks. We have sort of curfew from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And no restaurants, no clubs, no, like everything is closing down because the number of cases is increasing. Like yesterday, we have 605 cases, 605 cases. The day before, 500 something. And you know, Lebanon is very small. It's only 6 million, the population. So it's a big number. Before, like 2 months ago, we used to have 35 cases a day, 20, but 600 is a lot. And in the camps, actually, the first period of COVID-19 virus, we were pure. We did not have any cases inside the camps. Unfortunately, about a month ago, we started to have cases, and now we have in Burj al-Barajni camp, where the population is 45,000, yes, but we have around 28 cases. We are very worried about the situation because, as I told you, there is no way to do physical distancing. No way, like people live together as if they live in one house. Also, the economic situation doesn't like allow people to buy all the disinfectant and the masks and so this makes life very difficult for them, and they are very worried about the situation. We don't have also the hospital inside the camp. It's very simple and small, and really can't take COVID-19 virus patients with COVID-19.
When you speak about the situation, like especially with COVID, and how you as organization, what you do exactly to deal with this?
Actually, from the beginning, as an organization, I said earlier, civil society, NGO sector in the refugee camps is very active. And from the first minute, we took responsibilities. We started to raise awareness about COVID-19 virus. We started to distribute, and you helped us with one kit, hygiene kit. We distributed hygiene kits to people as well. We always do provide people with information. We always, because people can't come, what we do home door-to-door education sometimes. People don't have phones. Not all people have phones, so we can't do things online. Many children, actually, they could not follow their education because it was online and they don't have phones. So what happened? They missed this year. Like, this is what we do, actually. It's mostly raising awareness sessions. If there is a case and they report it to us, we report to the United Nations, we report to the Ministry of Health. We also talk to the family of that person, and we see who that person met, so we can do the test for his friends and family members. Because the test is very expensive in Lebanon. It's 150,000 Lebanese lira.
Thank you, OLFAT. Rania, I have a question for you here, Kim. It's about, very simple actually. How many sectarian groups make up the government in Lebanon?
Again, there's a problem with the question because I don't see them as groups. I see them as a false identification of who we are. So the West, France, the United States says we are 18 communities coexisting and all this hogwash. It's like saying, oh look, in North Carolina you have Protestants and Southern Baptists and they're neighbors, and oh my God, they're not shooting each other. It is that level of absurdity. So yes, when you talk about, I think what Kathy Jackson is referring to is the overall government. We have a member of parliament, we have a parliament, and we have a government. But what's really important for people to understand is we do not have a government like you do in the US, where you have political parties and you vote for their political vision. In Lebanon, we have 6 sectarian leaders, Shia, Sunna, Druze, Mwarni, Greek Orthodox, all of that nonsense. Okay, 6 sectarian leaders, and they then appoint whoever they want to run in whatever election, and those individuals win and go into parliament, and then they appoint whoever they want in the government, and the government does not oversee the parliament. They all work together, and they all work together completely to distribute whatever crumbs can be distributed amongst themselves and to maintain a relationship of clientelism with the people. So again, there's a problem with looking at us in Lebanon as groups, because we are groups. We are Lebanese and Palestinians and Syrians and Armenians and Kurds, or you could look at us as all of us are people of this land, but let's please step away from this false identity. So I hope that answers your question, but currently we do not really have a functioning state. We don't have a state. We have 6 individuals that have collectively decided not to make decisions and have left the decision making for foreign countries, and this leaves us in the state of gross incompetence and gross impotence. I see there's a lot of other questions that have been raised in the Q&A about the French reform, so to speak.
Yeah, Macron and
So one of the questions is, what about Macron's pushing reform related to IMF aid? Does that mean more austerity? What impact have US sanctions had so far on Lebanon? The concept that we could get any salvation from the International Monetary Fund is also deeply, deeply problematic, because I'm sure your listeners and your viewers all know very well the structural adjustment policies of the International Monetary Fund and the way that they would push for privatization of public spaces and public resources. Macron's reform is not so much related to IMF aid as much as it is related to demilitarization, quote unquote, of Hezbollah and the strengthening of the United Nations interim force, and therefore the weakening of Hezbollah's military policies. They are more interested in demilitarization of our defense abilities than they are interested in further privatization and further economic austerity. We already have austerity in Lebanon because 1, we never really had functioning institutions to begin with, and 2, because we've had such a drop in our wages and in our currency. US sanctions have had an impact on Lebanon, most specifically with regards to the ability of our banks to function, and they have had a deeper relationship, a deeper impact on Lebanon when you look at the US Caesar Act, because in no way can any really decent industry in Lebanon flourish without relationships with Syria. It would be absurd to think that we can have agriculture without relationships to Syria, for example. So the US Caesar Act, I would argue, has greater ramifications on Lebanon's economy than the particularities of these US sanctions. But we know very much that US sanctions, as other sanctions, are basically a collective punishment against the people for an unethical intervention in domestic policies. there is a question about whether my political party believes in granting Palestinians in Lebanon a Lebanese citizenship. And no, we do not, because we consider the Palestinian identity to be threatened. And therefore, we consider the Palestinian identity to be of greater value in the liberation of Palestine than the Lebanese citizenship. However, what we do believe is in restoring all political, economic, and civil rights to Palestinian refugees. So the only difference between a Palestinian in Lebanon and a Lebanese in Lebanon would be that the Palestinian would carry a different passport, and that would be it. All other rights would be restored to Palestinians. But once we try in any way to weaken that Palestinian identity, then we would be giving food and fodder to Zionism, and we reject that because we consider the Palestinian identity to be of great value. And I can go into detail as to how we also look at marriage laws with Palestinians and so on and so forth. But that is something that, that we believe.
Yeah, Rania, I want to ask the same question actually about this passport. I want to try OLFAT. What do you think about that?
Actually, I raised my hand to answer this question as well.
I didn't see your hand, but I'm really curious. I want to see what the Palestinian refugees are.
Actually, I'm talking about myself and many who I know, we have the same attitude. No, I'm very proud of being Palestinian, and I don't want to change my nationality. No one has the right to force you to change. Why I should be given the Lebanese citizenship? Why? It's like we asking the Lebanese government to treat us as human beings and give us our civil rights. And we don't want the citizenship. We don't want the nationality. I'm very proud of being Palestinian, and I want to keep my nationality.
Thank you. Rania, the other issue is connected to the future. I know there were like many protests taking in the ground, and sometimes there's certain different groups, they protest in the ground, and sometimes some clashes that happens. How the people they manage this? How this, like, I'm speaking for all Lebanese, including the refugees they are living, Palestinian or Syrian. And especially after this explosion, where do you see this kind of protest? I know there are different opinions in the ground. How it managed so far? I don't know the future, how it will be.
Let's go back a little bit. We didn't have a revolution in Lebanon. And I think the word revolution is tossed around romantically. Revolution means people are united in support of something. We are not united in Lebanon in support of something. We are generally united in outrage over something. None of us are happy about the economic situation. None of us are happy about the demise of our institutions. None of us have real political trust in either all or some of the sectarian leadership. But we are not united as people in what we want. So therefore, it's not a revolution. We've had a series of protests, which some of us call an intifada, an uprising, hirat, whatever. But let's be very clear, it's not a revolution. From October onwards, we had a division. So there were those of us that were organizing with very clear political visions as to what we want. There were others, particularly Hezbollah, that viewed those protesting as being conspiratorial, as being aided by foreign embassies, and, you know, throwing us all under that bus. Okay. There were others, the so-called Progressive Socialist Party, which is neither progressive nor socialist, which is basically Walid Jumblat and his cronies. And you have the Lebanese forces, Samir Jaja and his cronies, and they worked to co-opt the protest, to try to join the opposition, forgetting that they are also bedrocks of the very same sectarian political system that we oppose. So they have no right to join us in opposing the sectarian system so long as they are part of it. But this has become the division now that we see. You have those that are very centralized, such as Hezbollah and the Amal movement, okay, that just ignore, dismiss the protesters and accuse many of us as being foreign agents. You have others, Samir Jaja, Walid Jumblat, I know a few of the questions are specifically about them, that have sought to co-opt the protest movement and continue to seek to co-opt and to present themselves as opposition. It would be the equivalent in the United States of Joe Biden trying to present himself as a socialist. That is the equivalent, okay, truly. So they have no right to join a movement that asks for an end to the sectarian political system. So the protest, of course, weakened a lot. particularly during the pandemic when we weren't allowed to protest. There was a large protest after the explosion, and there is a lot of organizing that happens, and we know this from history. Protests in and of themselves do not change public policy. Protest, when they are with a clear political vision and clear political organizing, have the ability to change public policy, but not alone. So the protests are important, but not alone. Okay, so we're still protesting. There's become an increased cry after the explosion for a real development of a political alliance in which many of us are asking for a transitional government with legislative authorities to begin to build the process for a civil state. So there is that.
Yeah, I have another question for OLFAT. Sorry. OLFAT, of course, you saw maybe what they call it peace agreement. The Arab, yes. The Emirates and Israel be what they call it peace, and I want you, Rania, too, to participate on that too later. But how this impact? What you think as Palestinian refugees living in the diaspora and the exile, like me, like you? What you think about this? How this will impact the struggle for Palestine and for right to retain, etc.
I'll tell you, I never expect anything from the Gulf, from the Arabs. I never expect any good things. And actually, they treated us always they treated us as if they have already peace with the Israelis. Now they only announced it. So the impact, it's like before. I don't see the impact because already we are treated badly by them, already. So, no, it makes no difference for me. It's...
Thank you. And for you, the same question, actually, Rania, but I will add to that. How many Arab countries you think they donated and supported? How many, or who are the countries they supported to Lebanon? Maybe you saw the question. At the same time, all about these kind of peace deals, like for me, when they say peace agreement, like I saw many articles about that, like Emirates, they were in war with Israel. How come? Like now they are reaching peace agreement. But the idea right now, all these kind of the new, I call it, it reminds me with Beirut's book, The New Middle East, if you remember, 1996, after Oslo Agreement, and how is the shifting, whatever it was under the table, all these kind of communication between Israel and many other Arab countries, now it's on, you can see it, you can watch it, the normalization taking. And I believe all these countries, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Libya, Yemen, they are paying certain kind of price for all these kind of normalization. Now, the same question about this, what they call it, new peace agreement, at the same time, the impact on Lebanon and Palestinians living in Lebanon.
Well, I mean, we consider the Oslo Accords to be the third catastrophe imposed on our people in occupied Palestine. It began with 1967, and then, of course, the horrific Oslo Accords. And I'm bringing up the Oslo Accords because what we see happening with the United Arab Emirates is a continuation of the Oslo Accords, this push to further normalize what they had been doing under the table for decades. So yes, we are expecting these military agreements to gain surface between the UAE and Israel, to be followed by Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, maybe Oman. There is word of Sudan following. So there will be this, okay? They had been doing this under the table. By moving it from under the table to above the table, though, it will have huge ramifications on our struggle for liberation in Palestine. Huge ramifications because, one, it will make normalization with the enemy all the easier. It would make boycott of the Israeli state all the more difficult. It would make political organizing and even the mere presence of Palestinians and Lebanese in the United Arab Emirates much more difficult. So we should very soon expect expulsion or silencing of Lebanese, Syrians, Palestinians in the United Arab Emirates and in other parts of the Gulf, okay? So all of this will make it more difficult. And of course, the Gulf with their money have huge influences in Lebanon with regards to trying to shift our domestic policies. Lebanon will never normalize with Israel for very simply because that would be the start of another civil war. And I'm not just saying this out of pure rhetoric. we have a very large percentage of our people in Lebanon that still recognize Israel to be an enemy. So this country is valiant in its opposition to the state of Israel. Syria is valiant in its opposition to the state of Israel. Other countries in the region, I'm not so sure how strong that opposition is, and we need to be very careful about this. What that means then for our comrades in the United States, and how you can be in solidarity with our struggle for liberation, is it makes it all the more important now for Americans to support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, and for Americans to stand opposed to Biden's comment that BDS is anti-Semitic and that Linda Sarsour is anti-Semitic. We have to, I mean, the struggle for liberation in Palestine from the United States cannot be separated from the struggle for real democracy in the United States, so long as the two primary contenders for presidency in the United States basically are two individuals whose policies are almost identical when it comes to global wars and civil repression and the state of Israel. So we need your support in the United States to amplify the BDS movement. We need your support in the United States to recognize that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, quite the opposite, that Zionism is anti-Semitism, that Zionism itself is an affront against Jews, and that to stand in solidarity for liberation is to stand in solidarity for liberation. So this is how we need your support in the United States to support us. But yes, we are facing a great deal more difficulties in the region, a great deal more difficulties, and we expect many, many more difficulties to come.
Yeah, actually, you bring us to the question we want to raise. It's what you need from us in the United States. You answered in very clear way about that. I don't know, OLFAT, you want to add to that about most of our participants in this panel? Actually, they are United States, and of course others outside on Facebook. I don't know how many and where they are. Do you want to say something? What you need from the people in the United States? Yeah, go ahead.
Of course, we need, like what Rania said, we need political support. And also, we need, you know, as I said earlier, we are very dependent on aid programs to survive. So to be strong and to be empowered, we need aid programs. We need support in daily activities. We need support in everything, education, health, whatever. Also, I always believed in developmental work, but now we can't talk only about developmental work. We need also some relief work because people need to survive. So we need two, political support and we need aid support, whatever people can afford.
Actually, we need your support too in the United States, whatever the people they are doing on the ground. This is not only from one way. People in the ground, how they really survive this kind of a crisis and come, they can teach us in the United States. And I'm speaking with you actually. I'm based in Berkeley in our office, and I'm looking outside. It's really very smoky, the fire in California. And we see people evacuated, leaving their houses. And we see people actually, homeless people, and the number of the homeless people, they lost their houses is increasing wherever you go around our area. Actually, because you inspire us, and this is like a struggle. It's connected with each other, no matter where you are. Simply, I want to ask this question. Simply, Rania, for you, OLFAT, etc. It's, is there another war coming between Israel and Hezbollah? This is one of the things, like the whole tension on the borders.
Yes,
is the war eventually coming?
I'm telling you, I will tell you.
Excuse me.
Sorry, Dr. Rania, I will leave the floor for you because you are talking about politics. So you will answer it from political aspect, analysis, whatever. I'll tell you, always people here expect war, unfortunately, always. Like even look what's going back to what Rania said at the beginning, like we can't expect worse. Actually now, wherever I go, people say, still like, expect worse. Like what worse will happen? What? People don't know, but they say it. Like we still are expecting something bad to happen. This is what people say. They talk about war, they talk about explosions, they talk about another types of viruses, they talk, And I have a Norwegian friend. Once she told me, you are very strange people here in Lebanon. If you don't have war, you prepare for war.
Yeah, yeah, it does make sense. Actually, even for us as Mecca, all the time when we are planning for next year or for the coming like 3 months plan, etc., all the time we think, what will happen? Gaza, is this Gaza first or Lebanon first? All the time we try to react and prepare for that. Rania?
Ziad, I have to say, we have not had a war in Lebanon between Hezbollah and Israel. That did not happen. We had a war in Lebanon between Lebanon and Israel, and we need to be very clear about that. When Israel committed its 2006 aggression, they committed their aggression against all of Lebanon and against all the Lebanese. Not just they obliterated, I mean, they destroyed such a large segment of the south. They also destroyed large segments of Beirut and Baalbek. But it was a war against the country, against our infrastructure, against all our people, okay? Had we not had Hezbollah with their military defenses, then the war would not have been won militarily, okay? And Israel would have sought to reoccupy Lebanon because we also liberated Lebanon. Beirut was liberated from Israeli occupation in 1983. The south, most of it was liberated from Israeli occupation in 2000, okay? Nevertheless, the presence of Hezbollah in a militarized fashion is present in Lebanon because we don't have a state. So we need to understand that. All of these political parties in Lebanon are armed to the teeth because we don't have a state. So what we dream about is actually having a state that recognizes Israel is our enemy. And therefore, we need to be teaching properly in our schools. We need to be protecting our telecommunications. We need to be building our defense and our offense, so on and so forth. Now, as to your question, are we expecting another Israeli war on Lebanon? In all honesty, no. Domestically, Israel is not going through an easy time. There is a great deal of difficulties right now between Netanyahu and between other Israeli parties. This would not be a time for Israel to commit a violent act of aggression against Lebanon now. Rather, I would argue that Israel is working to commit another kind of warfare, which is an economic warfare and an infiltration in Lebanon by trying to put pressure on us in Lebanon via the United States, via France, via the IMF and others. Economic sanctions are a form of warfare. So we need to recognize that war can come in many different shapes, not just through bunker bombs and depleted uranium shells and cluster bombs, but war can also come in the shape of economic sanctions. Right now, let's be very frank about it. There's no need for Israel to commit another act of aggression against Lebanon because we are falling apart. Lebanon has never, ever been as weak as we are today, even during the Civil War. From 1975 to 1991, we have not been as weak as we are today. A country that is bankrupt cannot get any weaker, which therefore means if we do not have national leaders, not sectarian leaders, but national leaders who have the courage to say no, we might be influenced by foreign money coming in from the Gulf, from France, from the US, goodness knows what, with political conditionalities that would seek us to surrender our dignity to the Israelis. This is a real threat. But the act of war itself, you know, the typical traditional war, I doubt the timing right now would suit the Zionist state.
First of all, accept my apology about the question. It's about, the war. No, it's the idea. I understand you very well, what you mean. But me, all the time, I got the question in this way. But right now, for me, it's the war is still going on. I can see the sky of the Lebanese. I see the drones. Not me, I see it, I read. And we hear in the news about all these kind of drones, all these kind of attacks. Part of the Lebanese land is still occupied by the Israelis. The same, the Golan Heights, the Syrian under attack, like almost weekly or at least every other day they attack in Syria. Now, when it comes to the future, and I know we are coming to the end almost to that. We have many questions. I will keep this a question. We have many questions coming here. And of course, for anyone is in the chat room or Q&A, you can get the emails. If you have a specific question, you can reach out to the people. You can reach out to us to Mecca. And before I close, I want to ask the both speakers if they want to add anything, say anything in the end of this panel. It was amazing. I will not end here, but I will leave the mic for you. OLFAT, can you go first?
Yes, again, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity. I would like to tell people always keep in your mind that there are people who suffer every day in their lives, and it's a blessing to share what you have with others. As I always say, we are not begging, but this is one of our rights, because our problem, we are not lazy. We want to work, we want to be active, but if the laws and regulations are against us, that leaves people with very, very little opportunities, and actually they need to survive. So always support and help can lead to survival for the refugees. And as I always say, they will be less traumatized when they feel the support that surround them. So God bless you all, and hope the future will be better than nowadays. Thank you.
Rania?
Thank you, Ziad. Thank you, Ulfat, for sharing your thoughts. I will try to both answer the remaining questions and very briefly. One of the questions was how Zionism is anti-Semitism, and I think this is really important for people to recognize. Whenever there are individuals that claim a political philosophy in the name of a religious community, it becomes discriminatory against that religious community, regardless of that political philosophy. If I were to speak as, you know, Catholics of the world demand blah, 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 okay? It would be an affront to Catholicism if I am not using the particular book of the New Testament, okay? So when you have this marriage between a religious identity and a political philosophy, it is allowing for anti-Semitism. So Zionism is anti-Semitism. And when then they try to speak on behalf of all the Jews of the world, it creates a problem. So just to make that clear. I do want people to recognize that there is much that can be done from the United States, starting with opposing sanctions, be it against Syria or be it against Lebanon, starting with recognizing that the way that we are viewed in this region, be it Lebanese, Palestinians, Syrians, or Iraqis, is a narrative that is destructive to our national identity and destructive to democracy. Please start viewing us as people and not as sectarian communities that are coexisting. When it comes to Palestinians, I urge everybody to please recognize Palestinians as Palestinians and not as people from Gaza and people from the West Bank and people from other divided communities, but all are Palestinians, just to make that very clear. Within the United States, there can also be support for our struggle by supporting the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, and by particularly emphasizing the very problematic comments being made by Joe Biden and others from the DNC that are comments not only problematic against Palestinians and all those who support Palestinian liberation in the United States, but also his overwhelming love for Zionism and for apartheid Israel need to be confronted. Now, the decision in the US who you vote for becomes your decision, but at least recognize that very clearly. For us in Lebanon, be we Lebanese, Palestinians, or Syrians in Lebanon, there is a different political alternative that we are working to build. And it is a political alternative that is not sectarian. So one of the questions was, a significant number of Lebanese view Hezbollah as an obstacle to transforming the system. All the sectarian political parties in Lebanon are obstacles to transforming the system. And my party believes in peaceful negotiations with our brethren, peaceful negotiations, because they're the only thing that work. And we recognize that these sectarian political parties are weak and they are threatened internally and externally and could take this country into further ruin. Whereas those of us that work for a secular civil state in Lebanon can actually take this country forward rather than take it back. Thank you again for your time, and I'm ready online to answer any further questions any of you may have. But just hold on to the imagining of a free, liberated Palestine and a united region here that would then welcome you all, and we can throw apartheid Zionism back into the relics of history.
Soon. Thank you so much, Rania. Thank you so much, OLFAT. It was amazing to have you both. And I know it will not be, the time it will not be enough even to cover what's going on. It's amazing for us to have this opportunity. We learned a lot, really a lot from both of you. This is very important for us. And I want, for the people, they raised more questions actually, and we have more will come. We will forward it later for you. I want to thank everyone joined us, and please remember, you can do more and support and help. If you want to learn about how to do that, please go to our website. And they're not just us, there are many other organizations doing great work in Lebanon. This is the time where we need to come together and to support. Political support actually really very important too. And Rania, she spoke about it in a very clear way. And I know every morning you wake up, especially these days related to the American election, and everyone thinking about November, how it will be scary. For us and for many people living under oppression, it's not that much scary, I can say, because all the time you are living in this kind of oppression, just it goes ups and downs. It didn't end it didn't finish. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Rania and OLFAT. And please stay safe and healthy. I know you are locked down, you are stuck in your homes, stuck in this situation. I hope everything will be well with you, and we will get back soon to each other. More events to come. Thank you, everyone, and good night, good morning, have a good day, etc. Bye-bye.